The Second World War absorbed far more stories and mysteries than one can imagine. As the years pass, new facts emerge that not only complement the familiar picture of events, but also force us to look at the past from a completely different angle. Today, on the FactsRoom channel, we will reveal several astounding finds and incredible discoveries made in various years after those dramatic events ended. You will encounter gripping legends about hidden tunnels and lost treasures, unknown pages about mysterious submarines and ships, as well as the most unusual military operations you may never have heard of. Stay with us until the very end, because we have saved the most unpredictable story for the finale. In the coastal waters not far from the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian archipelago, the remains of a unique submarine from the era of the Second World War were discovered. It belonged to the Japanese Navy, was captured by the Americans, and was later deliberately scuttled. Years afterward, researchers found it at a depth exceeding 2,300 feet. This incredible find allowed us to reevaluate the progress of submarine construction of those times. We're speaking about the legendary vessel of the I-400 series, the largest submarines built by the Imperial Japanese Navy before the advent of nuclear technology. True giants of the seas, they were longer than a standard football field and could not only undertake extended voyages but also carry small bombers on board. The engineers' main idea was that the boat could surface quickly, launch the aircraft for a swift attack, and dive again before the enemy noticed the threat. Such innovations enabled the Japanese to plan audacious raids, often baffling Allied intelligence. Curiously, in addition to the already known characteristics of these vessels, historians suggest that the Japanese tried to supply their mega submarines with extra fuel reserves that allowed them to cross vast distances in the Pacific Ocean. The find off Oahu sheds new light on the details of the final operations when Japanese crews strove to save the surviving boats or keep them from falling into enemy hands. In the waters of the Black Sea, off the coast of what is now Russia, the fuselage of a Soviet bomber that had taken off toward Nazi German positions and then vanished without trace lay for decades. Many years later, a research vessel accidentally discovered its remains on the sea floor, sparking a wave of genuine interest. It was eventually determined to be a rare example of the P-2 dive bomber, famed for its speed and maneuverability. During the Second World War, these machines carried out numerous dangerous missions, often attacking enemy targets almost point blank. No one expected such advanced designs from Soviet aviation. When the bomber's body was lifted from the depths, the iconic red star, a symbol of an entire era, still adorned the fuselage. Fragments of the internal lining even survived, allowing a more detailed understanding of how such aircraft were built and improved. Study of the wreckage showed that the plane might have been brought down by anti-aircraft fire, though experts note other possible causes of the crash, technical problems and complex weather conditions. In addition, some archival materials indicate that on that very day, Soviet air forces were actively bombing strategic targets, which increased the risk of encountering well-prepared enemy defenses. Yet a truly astonishing story occurred in the mid-1990s, when in one of the rivers near the town of Ver-Uve, a sunk example of this legendary vehicle was raised. It had broken through the ice and gone under in January 1945 during the panicked retreat of the Germans. On board the vehicle, original parts were preserved, including the weapon and other pieces of equipment. Amazingly, after thorough restoration, this SDKFZ 251 could move once again. It was painted in characteristic camouflage colors, authentic inscriptions were recreated on its sides, and even the famous nickname Rosie, given by the crew, was retained. Today, this machine is one of the brightest illustrations of the engineering level of those years and proof of how important it is to treat historical artifacts with care. Artifacts that literally come back to life from the depths of oblivion. It is no secret that the Third Reich actively plundered occupied countries and confiscated valuables from Jewish families. Countless works of art, gold bars, and other riches were hidden by the Nazis all over Europe. When the Hitler regime fell, Allied soldiers discovered hidden caches and cargoes of immense treasures. One of the loudest legends is connected with the Polish city of Wałbrzych, where, according to rumor, an entire train loaded to the brim with gold, precious stones, and even fragments of the legendary Amber Room disappeared in mountain tunnels. Local folklore holds that German soldiers concealed the train there when the Red Army advanced from the east. Allegedly, the train remained in a tunnel dug beneath the castle in Wałbrzych. For decades, people searched for the gold train. Some tried to drill shafts, others sifted through old documents, but nothing resembling the legendary treasure was found. Yet enthusiasts have not stopped, because new suppositions and tunnel diagrams keep surfacing. In parallel, researchers discovered that the Nazis really did manage to remove a huge amount of valuables from neighboring towns. So the question of whether the gold train exists still excites adventurers worldwide. The mysterious phrase Yamashitas Gold has stirred treasure hunters for many decades. It is named after a Japanese army general who commanded the legendary 25th Army during the conquest of Malaya and Singapore. Rumor has it that under his direction the Japanese hid treasures looted throughout Southeast Asia. Stories tell that these vast riches were brought into remote caves, underground tunnels, or specially constructed shelters in the Philippines. The general supposedly planned to return for everything after the war. Reality proved harsh. Following battlefield defeats, he could not take anything away, and he himself was tried as a war criminal. Since then, treasure hunters have repeatedly tried to find any confirmation of the legend. People whisper that in the mountainous regions of northern Philippines, they really stumble upon caches filled with jewels and gold, but no substantial proof has been produced. Skeptics are certain all these myths are just another wartime tall tale, yet unusual markings and remnants of fortifications in the jungle continue to perplex lovers of adventure. A very unusual story unfolded in Uruguay around a bronze eagle found on a sunken German cruiser. This massive figure, about 6.5 feet high, once adorned the stern of the ship Admiral Graf Spee. After one of the first battles of the Second World War, the captain scuttled the ship off Montevideo rather than surrender it to the Allies. Years later, enthusiasts and official authorities organized the raising of the artifact. The enormous Nazi eagle clutching a swastika instantly sparked heated debate. Some proposed leaving it in a museum for historical context. Others wanted to melt it down to destroy the symbol of totalitarian ideology. Ultimately, a court ruled that the relic belonged to the state and could be sold, with the proceeds to be shared between the government and the team that recovered it. A decision was made to recast the eagle into the form of a dove, a symbol of peace. Thus, from an aggressive emblem might be born a reminder of how vital it is not to repeat the tragic mistakes of the past. Some historians, however, oppose this solution, arguing that it is an authentic exhibit of the era. But the Uruguayan authorities believe the symbolism of Nazi Germany should not be immortalized without rethinking. On the island of Alderney, part of the Channel Islands chain, unique fortifications are located, some of which were built as far back as ancient Roman times. Interestingly, during the Second World War, the Germans used one of the Roman forts, converting it into a full-fledged bunker and eradicating any trace of its historic appearance. Although local residents, as well as the entire British garrison, were evacuated after the occupation, the island was not deserted. Forced labor camps appeared, along with defenses meant to make this patch of land impregnable. The reinforced Roman fort, which the Germans nicknamed Piratenschloss, guarded a strategically important shoreline. Walls about 10 feet thick and ancient structures became the base for German gun emplacements and anti-tank works. Especially fascinating is that modern excavations show the Romans once situated the outpost, so troops could be quickly moved to the mainland if necessary. Under the Third Reich, engineers hastily added more modern defensive elements. The result is a bizarre mix of Roman heritage with 20th century bunker architecture. Today, historians and archaeologists strive to preserve and study these dual-layered fortifications, for they reflect the dramatic history of a small patch of land at the crossroads of eras and peoples. Imagine a unit possessing almost no real weapons, but equipped with inflatable tanks, mock-up airplanes, and powerful sound systems. That is exactly how the so-called Ghost Army worked. More than 1,100 talented artists, engineers, and sound technicians. Their task was to deceive enemy troops by creating the illusion of large military forces where none existed. The soldiers of the Ghost Army skillfully imitated entire columns of armored vehicles, set up fake guns, transmitted fictitious radio messages, and played recordings of marching regiments. Operations were conducted practically under the enemy's nose, sometimes only 4 miles from German positions. Such tactics misled the foe, distracting him and forcing the diversion of resources away from real offensives. For a long time, nothing was reported to the public about the Ghost Army, and only years later did it become known how seriously its actions saved American and Allied lives. For example, during the Normandy landings, these specialists created illusory landing groups, allowing real troops to break through defenses elsewhere. Historians believe that without such operations, the Second World War might have dragged on, since every deceptive maneuver had strategic value, enabling a far more effective use of surprise. When researchers carried out deep-water searches off the coast of Ireland, they stumbled upon one of the heaviest and deepest hoards of precious metals ever found in a wreck. They discovered more than 1,000 silver bars with a total mass of more than 1 million troy ounces of silver. The ship SS Gersapa, initially built with a steel hull, sailed under the British flag and was torpedoed by a submarine during the war. Most of the crew perished, and the ship went to the sea floor in the early 1940s. All those years, the wreck lay at an almost unreachable depth. Later, the company Odyssey Marine Exploration took on the search, aiming to raise the silver cargo. Ultra-modern equipment was required to dive to an extreme depth. In the end, the treasure was extracted from the holds, proving that even decades later, enormous values can hide in the ocean's depths. It became one of the loudest deep-sea operations of that time. The Kriegsmarine submarines, widely known as U-boats, posed a serious threat to the Allies, hunting convoys and transports in the Atlantic. They usually operated in wolf packs, coordinating attacks via intercepted radio signals, and sometimes shadowing a victim for days until enough submarines gathered for a sudden strike. Solo attacks also occurred when a submarine pounced on a convoy without support. After torpedoing a ship, the crew tried to dive as quickly as possible, for the counterfire could be deadly. To confirm success, they sent brief messages about the tonnage sunk. Yet the fate of many submarines was tragic. About 2/3 of all U-boats were destroyed. One such story is the discovery of the submarine U-576, found for the first time in decades off the east coast of North America. Researchers tried to ascertain whether anyone escaped through the hatches or whether the crew died, trapped inside as the sub went down. Historians also uncovered records showing that when this U-boat perished, Allied escort ships were actively operating in the area, attempting to intercept it. It is believed that the decisive blow was the result of coordinated action by several escort vessels and maritime patrol aircraft. And although the submarine might have carried important documents, they were never recovered. It sank too swiftly. The German cipher machine Enigma was such a complex device for encoding messages that the Allies could not decode enemy signals for a long time. The variety of settings allowed billions of encryption variants. Eventually, however, the efforts of the gifted mathematician Alan Turing and his colleagues in Britain bore fruit. Vulnerabilities in Enigma were discovered, and captured German codebooks enabled the creation of electromechanical bombees that cracked even complex ciphers. The breaking of Enigma is considered a crucial achievement that brought the end of the war closer. The Allies learned about the movements of the Nazi fleet, planned offensives, and strategic intentions. To keep the fact of the code-breaking secret, they sometimes deliberately sacrificed certain ships or cities, not revealing that they possessed the intelligence. That tactic, though horrifyingly harsh, ensured the source remained undisclosed and allowed continued advantage over the German side. An intriguing fact: surviving Enigma machines today command enormous collector value, and some are displayed in museums as symbols of engineering and cryptographic brilliance, although used for diametrically opposed purposes. The Japanese battleship Musashi was one of the largest war machines of its time, as long as several skyscrapers laid on their sides. Together with her sister Yamato, she was considered the pinnacle of imperial naval engineering. Yet, both ships failed to survive the war. Musashi sank during one of the largest naval battles off the Philippines. Many thought her lost forever in the bottomless depths, but an expedition led by one of the co-founders of a well-known corporation managed to locate the colossal wreck on the seabed. Researchers used submersibles capable of searching even under extreme pressure. On the hull, one can still see gun turrets and parts of the deck, heavily damaged by explosions and torpedoes. Interestingly, one Japanese admiral's report stated that Musashi outgunned most enemy ships. Her guns could fire over colossal distances, making her a true floating island of death, so to speak. Nevertheless, she proved vulnerable to modern U.S. aviation. Now, found on the ocean floor, she serves a different mission, returning to historians and relatives of the fallen an important chapter of the past. In one secluded corner of Lake Michigan, in the northern United States, a rare example of the Douglas SBD-5 Dauntless dive bomber was discovered. It had lain underwater for many decades, covered with silt, algae, and a layer of mussels. Although parts of the fuselage were badly deformed over time, the aircraft was raised and sent for restoration. The Dauntless was valued for its ability to dive at extreme angles, sometimes up to 80 degrees. Such attacks were maximally destructive to the enemy, especially ships, because they yielded superb bombing accuracy. In the Battle of Midway, these aircraft played a decisive role, sinking several large Japanese carriers. Each discovery of such an aviation rarity not only fills gaps in military history, but also gives restorers a chance to show how technology of those years looked and functioned. The Lake Michigan restoration promises to be long, as many components must be replaced and microorganisms removed from the fuselage. But the result will surely become a museum's pride, allowing visitors to touch a living legend of aircraft engineering. An explosive story took place in the small German town of Heikendorf. An elderly man kept in his basement a real Panther tank, an anti-aircraft gun, and even a torpedo. When these details surfaced, authorities had to call in the military to remove the heavy equipment. Lawyers spent a long time figuring out whether the owner should be arrested for storing such a dangerous museum. The mere presence of a Panther in private hands is unheard of, for this tank is considered one of the best German armored vehicles of the Second World War. It boasted high gun rate of fire and good mobility, but had serious drawbacks: maintenance complexity, production cost, and several technical flaws. It soon became known that a museum in the United States showed interest in acquiring the tank. The most astonishing fact was that dozens of soldiers and almost an entire day were required to pull the trackless tank from the narrow basement. Town residents were shocked. Many had no idea their neighbor housed a real combat monster from the era. Although these scrolls are not directly related to the military actions of the Second World War, their discovery in the late 1940s brings us to the post-war period, when the world was engrossed in reconstruction and the search for lost artifacts. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the most ancient manuscript fragments found near Qumran, close to the Dead Sea shore. They comprise hundreds of textual fragments, some of which miraculously survived almost intact. The content of the scrolls revealed to scholars the religious and cultural features of a community that lived in that region thousands of years ago. At first glance, they seem unrelated to the World War, yet their discovery fell into a time when the Western press avidly sought sensational relics. A curious nuance: the scrolls gained broad international fame during a period when many scholars emigrated from Europe because of the war. Thus, they came under the scrutiny of several academic schools, each trying to use the fragments to support its own theories on the development of Judaism. In this way, the scrolls became another artifact of discord, achieving cult status in modern times. Turning to abandoned military sites, one cannot ignore the numerous American bases scattered across Greenland from the Second World War and especially used during the Cold War. Once, strategically placed airfields and fuel depots were built on the icy expanses. But when some became unnecessary, all the property was simply left behind. American flowers is what locals call not blooming plants, but the vast number of rusty barrels left by the military. They lie in heaps, corrode, and leach harmful chemicals into the soil. Worse still, abandoned buildings containing asbestos and other hazardous materials stand open to the wind. The local ecosystem, already fragile, suffers greatly from such pollution. The situation is especially acute at Camp Century, a subglacial base built during the Cold War era. Ice has begun to melt due to global warming, and there is a risk that radioactive and toxic substances, which designers expected to bury forever, will emerge. Scientists, environmentalists, and politicians now puzzle over how to solve this problem, for Greenland remains one of the most vulnerable territories in ecological balance. It all happened in a house in England where, during chimney repairs, the remains of a carrier pigeon were found with a capsule attached to its leg. The poor bird, after braving the dangerous route from Nazi-occupied Europe, had flown into the flue to rest, but suffocated from smoke. It lay undiscovered for several decades. When the capsule was opened, a coded note on the thinnest paper was inside. Presumably, it was information for British sabotage units. During the war, pigeons were used as a kind of biological parcel, for they silently and quickly covered great distances. Such communication was especially needed by spies behind enemy lines. Radio transmitters were often too bulky and easily detected by Nazi operators. Scientists from Bletchley Park, famous for breaking Enigma, undertook to decipher the message. However, it was so compressed that they have not yet established what secret the pigeon carried. Perhaps this fragment of history will remain unsolved, but the very fact of the find shows how creatively wartime communication was handled. Here are the incredible stories that opened to us when considering the finds of the Second World War and its surroundings. Every described discovery, whether a sunken ship, a hidden bunker, or a treasure legend, reminds us of the enormous scale of that war and how deep a mark it left in the most diverse corners of the planet. Sometimes, even today, the past suddenly reminds us of itself when an abandoned submarine is raised from the ocean depths or old crates with unknown contents are pulled from mountain caves. You never know which secrets, hidden in archives and underground, are still waiting for their moment to come into the light and overturn established views of the past.